This is Daniela Camboni for Kitco News, and joining me this Friday is Greg Hunter over at USA Watchdog. We're ready to talk about Greece, the US dollar, Bernanke, a bunch of fun things. Greg, always a pleasure.
Good to see you, Daniela.
All right, Greg. Well, the inspiration for today's topic is your latest commentary entitled Dollar Alternative Anyone, where you speak about how more and more countries are looking for alternatives to the US dollar.
That is without question. I mean, you look at China, which is now the number 2 economy in the world, and you look at Japan, which is the number 3 economy, was number 2, and they are making exchanges for yen and yuan. And it's also happening, for example, with China and Russia, or yen and ruble. Now, if Tunisia was making a dollar swap with South Africa, it wouldn't be a big deal, or they were wanting to trade in their own currencies. But these are big countries that are moving away from the dollar, looking for alternatives to trade and not settle their international trade in dollars. That's how most things get settled. And that's a big, big move. And I think it's a tectonic shift. And when the U.S. dollar ceases to be the world's reserve currency, there's going to be big, big trouble, especially for people here in the United States.
But it's not just other countries, right, Greg? It's also some U.S. states. Wyoming passing earlier this week a Doomsday bill. Can you comment a little bit about this?
Well, Wyoming is one of many states that are the major feature in these Doomsday bills are what? Alternative currencies. And, they can't produce Federal Reserve notes, but it says in the Constitution you can use gold and silver for transactions. So what they're doing is on the state level, they're saying, okay, let's look into a bill where we can get people to use their gold and silver as a transaction and not charge them capital gains, at least at the state level. At this moment, you still have to do it at the federal level. But there is the Sound Money Act at the federal level. I don't know where that is, but they're wanting to use gold and silver as an alternative currency. And Wyoming is one in a long line of states that has passed legislation or looking into legislation to use gold and silver coinage as a alternative currency. Now, many of them want to use gold and silver eagles and U.S. minted coins. Other bills say use any increment of coin from any country you can. Silver maple leafs, gold maple leafs, Krugerrands, and we'll use it. And I think that there's a lot of people. It's almost more than a dozen states are passing legislation looking into this. Now, these aren't just a bunch of crazy people from the fringe. And when you look at the stories and see the people at the state level quoted saying, we're not in very good shape. There's nobody in the world can say that, the U.S. is in great shape financially, and we'd be foolish not to look into this. What that is a big indicator of checking the pulse of how smart people around the country, the U.S., are viewing the U.S. dollar. Is it going to happen tomorrow? I don't think so. But, people like John Williams says if there's a mass exodus of these, 12 trillion liquid dollar assets held outside the country, and maybe not even a mass exodus, maybe it's a couple of $1 trillion, you could see fuel prices skyrocket because of the currency exchange.
All right, Greg, still on this topic, earlier in the week, Ron Paul flashing a silver eagle during a hearing with Bernanke, where he basically told Bernanke he killed the dollar. Your thoughts?
Well, he took him out to the woodshed and gave him a sound paddling. I mean, he says, the BLS, which Bernanke says, well, we don't do the inflation numbers. Well, come on. I mean, the whole thing is a rigged game, and everybody wink, wink, nod, nod knows it's a wink game. They say that their core rate is aiming for 2%. If you take a look at a chart, it tripled since 2010. It went from 0.6% to over 2%. That's just the core with the way they adjust their numbers. So it's lower screen left to upper screen right going up. But if you did inflation, computed inflation, the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics did it in 1980, where they counted everything, it was the cost of living and not the cost of survival, you would see that inflation is really more than, around 10%. Now, even Ron Paul said, hey, listen, do you go to the grocery store and buy your groceries? Yes, I do, Bernanke says. Well, then inflation is not 2%. And anybody who's going to the grocery store and going to the gas pump knows that inflation is not 2%. And of course, those two items are cut out of the core, which is ridiculous. At your core, who doesn't need food and energy? I want to live there. I want to live where you don't need food and energy. I guess that's heaven.
Well, we'll get there one day, Greg.
I hope so. Not anytime soon, but
Finally, Greg, save the best for last. A recent Reuters report confirming that in the small print of the Greek bailout is a provision for creditors to seize Greek national gold reserves, which leads to my question, can lenders seize gold from countries that are defaulting on debt?
I think they can, especially if that gold is held in their country. I mean, if you take a look at what's going on with, the Federal Reserve, if they pumped out back in the aftermath of 2009, according to the GAO, they pumped out $16 trillion in loan money to all kinds of people. They bailed out banks. They bailed out foreign companies. They bailed out foreign banks. The ECB has bailed out people. Why, if they're holding somebody's gold, why wouldn't they want to take it as collateral?
So Italy, Greece, both highly at risk.
Oh, I think anybody who is getting a bailout, any country getting a bailout from the countries giving the bailout are at risk of losing their gold, particularly if their gold is held outside the country. And you think, oh my goodness, your gold, most of Germany's gold because of the Cold War is held where? In the United States. And other countries allow the Federal Reserve Bank to hold its gold. I think the U.S., the Federal Reserve has somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 tons of gold. Now, in a systemic failure, in a calamity, don't think for 1 minute the U.S. would not confiscate that, because as the United States isn't going to leave, the USS Kitty Hawk with no fuel in the middle of the Persian Gulf. We're not going to leave soldiers in Afghanistan with no ammunition and send them a bag of rocks. We're just not going to do it.
But does that gold belong to Italy or does it belong to the central bank, Greg? Would they really be able to seize it?
I think they, in severe, and we're talking about, what you keep hearing, even with the European debt crisis, is systemic failure. It could break down all the banks. And Daniela, I think in a severe situation, I think that anything could happen. And yes, I do think it would confiscate it, because we're not going to go to another fiat unbacked currency when the currencies go kapoof and nobody wants to use them, particularly the dollar. We're not going to go to another fiat currency like an Amero. We're going to go to a gold back, some sort of backing where people can believe in it. And I think, yes, gold can be confiscated, and desperate countries and people do desperate things, and I think it would be confiscated.
All right, Greg, and despite the sell-off we saw this week, would you say you're still bullish on gold?
Without question, and I have a theory, and my theory is just about every time Ben Bernanke makes a major announcement or major testimony, particularly in front of Congress, gold gets whacked. And what happened when Bernanke was in front of Ron Paul, where Ron Paul's holding up the Silver Eagle saying, this bought 4 gallons of gas in 2006, and now this Silver Eagle will buy 11 gallons of gas, basically demonstrating the store of wealth, the buying power of silver, and the diminishing value of the dollar. And of course, what happens to gold? It gets whacked 70, 80 bucks. And so, yes, I am still bullish on gold. Given nothing has changed fundamentally. The ECB is woefully undercapitalized. The sovereign debt crisis, these guys are leveraged up 40 and 50 to 1 in these banks. That's what it really is. It's a banking crisis. There's some like 235. Yes, 235 trillion in derivatives held by about 4 banks. The banks in the U.S. have something in the neighborhood of 32 trillion in credit default swaps if this thing blows up. So we have a lot of debt, we have a lot of leverage, and we don't have a lot of growth. We're not producing we're not getting into a new age of the internet or a new age of industrial revolution, and so things are not looking good, I don't think, on a macro scale.
All right, Greg, on that note, I would like to thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Kitco News. As always, you can email me your comments and questions at newsfeedback@kitco.com. For Kitco News, I'm Daniela Cambone.